Hi, and thanks for joining me. I'm Susan from So Peaceful, and in this video I'm going to show you how to get a beautiful turn-edged applique using pre-cut applique shapes. If you've bought a kit from me online or one of the craft shows we've been at, or you'd simply just like to learn how to use those shapes, stick around and we'll get started. In our kit you'll find backing fabric, some fusible pellin or parlin, embroidery thread, and some long strips of fabric that you're going to use as borders around your mug rug. We can put all of those away for now because we won't need them for a while. We have to do the applique first. So the things that you will need will be your background fabric, the smaller pieces of fabric that we're going to use for the applique, and you'll also find a little bag, and that will have in it the pre-cut applique shapes together with a size 10 applique needle and a little spool of 80 weight wonderful thread. Now together the needle and thread will make a huge difference in keeping our stitches as less visible or least visible as possible. So with the pre-cut applique shapes, they come in a range of designs, and depending on which kit you've chosen, you'll have different petals or leaves. One that we're going to do here today, you'll notice that you have 5 petals. The first thing you will need to do, if you're buying a bag of them, they come in sets of 8 flowers, is that they're generally layered together because the pieces are cut together, obviously not individually, and you may need just to get a little pin or something to pull them apart to separate them. They could have 2 or 3 stuck together. You'll notice that one side is what I call flat and the other one is shiny. The shiny side is the fusible side. So when we're putting it onto our fabric, make sure as much as you possibly can that the fusible side is the side that you're facing onto the wrong side of your fabric. If it does stick to your arm, it will come off relatively easily. I just normally grab a little pin or something and scrape it off. So when you get your fabric, just have a look at how you're going to use it. This particular one, I've given you a nice big piece of a contrasting fabric, which I've got planned to use for the flower petals, and you can lay those out any way that you like on your fabric. So you might have a flower at the end of the petal, but you're going to put your petals on your fabric so that the shiny side is on the wrong side of our fabric, and when we put those petals on there, we need to make sure that there's at least 1/4 inch between them, so 1/4 inch around each one, so you're looking at sort of 1/2 inch between, so you can actually cut around them with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So with your applique shapes positioned, remember shiny side down on your fabric. We're just going to give them a press, and it'll only take a few seconds. Just to make sure they stay in the position that you're wanting them. So go through and do that then with all of your pieces. Once you've chosen the piece of fabric for the center of the flower and the one that you're going to use for your leaves, if you feel that they're likely to come off, they'll only need another second or 2. It's not a lot. And just do that with all your pieces. Look, pop that one is the wrong side up. Now please, if you're going to if you do find that happens, please don't use your fingers to grab it off. Get something underneath it to lift it, and pop it down again where it's meant to go, give it a press. If it does lose its stickiness or its ability to refuse, just use a little bit of glue from your glue pen to get it down there. Okay, and we'll just turn that on off, and then we'll start cutting them out. So remembering 1/4 inch around each of your shapes. Now 1/4 inch is really the maximum that you'll need. What we'll find when we start turning those edges over, some of them we might need to trim back a little bit. So just see how you go. We don't want it too short that it might, the edge might pop out and start to fray. We need to make sure we get it tucked well underneath, but just keep in mind it is easier to, particularly with the rounded areas, to not have too much. So when we've got all our pieces cut out, a couple of things then. You notice that I've trimmed them straight across the bottom on those petals, and the reason for that is when we lay out our flower petals, those ends are going to go underneath the circle in the middle, so you don't need to be able to fold over anything on the bottom. The other thing you'll notice is that I haven't bothered to cut out the center of that circle, and I won't bother to cut that out because the smaller circle will sit on top of it. Yeah, I don't consider that there's any need to cut that one out. You don't need to clip your outward curves, but I do recommend that you clip the inward ones. So anything that's got a curve that goes in like that, I tend just to give it a little clip, not all the way up to the paper's edge, but just close enough that when you turn it over, you'll be able to get a nice shaped curve. So we don't want to go all the way to the edge because again it will fray, but just a couple of threads away from the edge of your paper. So with the next step then, we will pick up our Soline glue pen. If you have a Sue Daly glue pen, they're both the same. I do recommend using either Soline or Sue Daly glue pen because they are water soluble. We know they're designed for this purpose, and they do have a really small end, which makes it easier to pop the glue on. So when we glue, we're going to glue not right on the edge because it makes it harder for us to stitch through later on, but just inside the edge, and we're going to then fold the fabric over. You don't need a lot of glue, it will sit down nicely. So just going around the edge, and I tend just to do a little bit at a time and gathering the fabric around my shape. And what you're looking for is to get some nice curves on that shape, no points or square ends, but thinking about the shape of your petal, and you're just going to follow that round with your finger. If you don't put too much glue on and you don't put your glue in the middle, as you turn your fabric over, you shouldn't end up getting sticky fingers, but it's handy just to have a wipe nearby just in case you end up getting those sticky fingers. So just go around and make sure you're happy that you've got a nice smooth shape there, and we'll go around and do all our shapes. When you get to your leaves, what you'll notice when we'll go around with this one is that there'll be an end that will just be at the end where the pointed, sharp point end is on the bottom of your leaf. You won't be able to turn it under, but you'll end up with a little tail, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because when we go to stitch it down, we'll tuck that tail in underneath. So just folding one side over the other and you'll end up with that little tail just sticking out like that. Again, making sure that you've got a nice smooth shape, and it's easy enough if you're not happy with an area of it, just picking up your fabric and reshaping it. And again, if you feel that it's too hard to turn the fabric over and get a nice smooth shape, particularly with the smaller circles, you might need just to trim the slightest little bit back. Don't go too far back, but if you're making that seam allowance a little bit shorter, you might find it easier to get that nice round shape that you're looking for. When you've finished folding the edge over all your pieces, we're up to the point where we're going to start putting it all together. Now, keep in mind that this paper is actually going to stay in the pieces. I'm not sure whether I mentioned before, but it is semi-water soluble, so the paper stays in, and we'll stitch it all to our background fabric with the paper in. What I'd like to do first of all is, because this little circle is going to go on top of that bigger one, I'd stitch those together first, and that way I'm not stitching through an extra layer of fabric. So I'm going to put those together first, and to do that and to get it to sit in the right position, I'm just going to use a little bit of Roxanne's glue and a little lump on the end there. Now, you won't need very much of this, and it's just simply for basting the two pieces together. I'm going to press it. Now remember, we had that little hole on the back of that piece there, so I'm just going to position my top piece over the top of that little hole, and with my iron I'll just press that together. Now that Roxanne's glue will dry on its own in about 15 minutes, but if we use the iron, it will sit there straight away. If we're in a hurry and we want to keep moving, also less risk of it moving around. So we'll turn that one off. Now, in your kit I mentioned that you had some 80 weight Wonderfill thread. Normally that would come on a spool, and we have packs of a whole range of neutral colours as well as some brights, but I tend to use the neutral colours. This is a thread that I use for both applique and English paper piecing. As I mentioned, I've given you a size 10 applique needle, and you could use that needle for both applique or English paper piecing, but I do tend to use the size 11 millimeters needle for EPP, but that's another story. The only difference is that the size 11 millimeters needle is longer, and because my fingers are getting a bit older, I find it easier to hold a longer needle. But when we're doing the applique, because it's a different stitch, the shorter needle is easier. So I've just threaded a length from fingertip to elbow, threaded that through my needle, and you'll find that it's not difficult to thread because the thread is so fine. And we'll just do a little quilter's knot on the end. So if you haven't done this before, just grabbing the end of the thread, putting it across the needle and holding it with your thumb. I wind the thread around the needle 2 or 3 times, and then I'm going to swap my thumb and push that needle up from the bottom while I've still got these 2 fingers holding the needle, and pull my, while those 2 fingers holding the knot, sorry, while I pull the needle out. Practice it a few times and it will be second nature. Putting our needle up from the bottom then through our 2 pieces of fabric, we're just going to come up through the side edge of our top piece, and it's a little stitch I tend to call a little hook. So we're coming up through the side of the fabric, the top shape, and then just down beside it. Try and keep your stitches straight up and down as much as possible, because then they'll be less visible than anything that's on an angle. So with our thread at the back, we're just going to travel forward if I had to guess a measurement, it's probably 1/8 of an inch. So again, just coming up through our top shape as close or as near to the side as you can get, but making sure you've got it securely caught in, and then our thread will go straight back down the side. Once you've got your 2 circles joined together, we'll start laying everything out on our background fabric. I'll just bring that down so you can see that properly. Before we start to lay everything out, keep in mind your seam allowances. So I would stay 1/2 inch away from the outside edges when we start to position everything. Other than that, it's completely up to you which way around. Up you go. Only thing to keep in mind though, that with your petals, particularly if you're doing the kit, this particular kit, you'll have 2 that have curves, and they're designed to go one on either side at the top so that they're facing downwards. You'll have one that it's a bit like a barrel, I'm guessing, so equal sides, and that one will go in the middle. And then you've got these other 2, and if we looked at this one, you'll notice that its curves are facing the same way as the top one, so I've put that one there in the second position, and this one is the long skinny one, and I've put him there. So when we start to think about how we're going to position them on our background fabric, as I said, keep them away from the edge as much as possible, and just position them in a way that you're happy with, but make sure that those tails are all going to sit underneath your circle of the center of the flower, making sure that you're happy with those. Your stem, when we put him in, will come from the base of this petal down there, and you could use a pen of some, one of those blue markers that you wash off later. Just going to use an invisible pen for the moment to give myself an idea of where my stem will go, and that will probably disappear, so I'd be better off using a blue pen that's going to stay there a bit longer by the time I get them stitched on. And our leaves face in with the points going outwards, and you'll see there I've still got those little tails, and we'll deal with those when we stitch them in. So if I'm happy with that, I've got pretty much an equal space either side, but as I said, you could have it pointing straight up, facing in the other direction. It's completely up to you. But when you're happy with your positioning, once again using your Roxanne's glue, you could pin it of course if you wanted to, but the glue, I was going to say less messy, it's not less messy than pins, but much easier to stitch if you don't have to stitch around pins. So we'll just take our circle off, and just one at a time, putting some dots down on those shapes. Not a lot, just to put them back into a position, and I will iron that, or I'd say ironing belongs with ironing clothes, and I don't do that. So I will use the iron to give it a press. Roxanne's glue, again, it's beautiful for glue basting, but it is water soluble, so it's not enough just to glue baste. We're going to have to stitch them down as well with the same little applique stitch that we used before, but we'll get them in position first before we stitch. And this time I will pop our circle over the top. this is where you need to be careful which mark you're actually using, because if I was using a friction pen, for example, and then I was pressing it, of course it would disappear with the iron. So if you're wanting to leave your line there ready to stitch on later, choose something that won't disappear when you iron it. So starting on this edge, I'm just going to come up through the top fabric and down the side, and I tend to just like keep going in that same way. I'm stitching from my right to left because I'm right-handed, but as I put the needle down, I'm able to bring it up about 1/4 of an inch, a bit further along, and grab the next stitch, and that way you're sort of not starting and stopping, but you know, do whatever you're comfortable with. The other thing to keep in mind also, and it depends on what colour thread I'm using, and when you're choosing the thread you use, I would pick the colour that will blend best with your top fabric rather than your background fabric. But when I've got fabric such as this one that's got little patches of white or a lighter colour mixed with a darker blue colour, I tend to try and bring my thread up. If I've got a light thread, I will bring my thread up through the lighter spots in the fabric, if that's at all possible. Otherwise, if it was all dark blue, I'd go for a much darker colour. If it's just a neutral one, I tend to pick a grey a thread if I don't have a dark blue, for example. So you know, again, it's just about doing everything that you can to disguise your stitches, but keeping them small, straight up and down, using a really fine coloured thread. All of those, a fine weight thread, and neutral colour that blends well with your fabric. All of those things will help to make your stitches as least visible as possible. So we're just going to keep going around, and we'll grab all of those petals in, and the inner circle when we get around to that point as well. So once we come up through that petal, I'll grab the inner circle in a few places, but we don't have to worry about that small circle again because we've already got that one stitched down. So I finished stitching around all the flower petals in the center. If I turn it over, I don't know whether you can see that, but it is, as I mentioned, just like a really small running stitch where I've gone around all the shapes, and there are a few little gaps in there, and that's where I've put the stitches through the other side onto the applique shapes. So we're up to doing those leaves, and when we positioned them on there, I folded the fabric over. I mentioned to you there would be a little tail, and I imagine you've got tails. Some people always manage to tuck their tails under when they're gluing. It surprises me, but they do manage to do it, and they're happy with it. And if you're one of those, good on you. But most of us will have little tails that are sticking out. When we position the petals onto the, the leaves onto a background fabric, and I put that glue around the outside edge, I try and avoid that tail area because we are going to have to tuck the tail underneath. So it's best if you haven't got any glue on that pointed area. And when we tuck it under, you'll notice I've started stitching, and as I said earlier, I'm right-handed, so I started stitching here, and I'm stitching down there to the point, and then the tail is actually after the point. So I'm almost stitched down here, and I'm on the point there. I like to think of that point as, or the tail, as being tucked under, and we're going to build a little fence around it. to lock him in. So when I'm on that last, if you think of it as a triangle, I'm going to do a last stitch right up to the point. Once again in exactly the same way, coming up, hooking into the side area there and coming straight back down, keeping your stitches nice and tight. And I'll put one right on that point too. I like to think, as a mention of it, as a triangle, and I'm actually building a little fence here so my tail will stay inside and won't come out. So what we're going to do is to tuck that tail in underneath, and I do tend to use my fingernail for that purpose. You could use the end of your needle to get it tucked in nicely underneath, and if you haven't got too much glue there will be room, so just do it gently, tuck it in, because the aim is to keep that point as nice and sharp as you possibly can. Once you've got that all tucked in nicely, just continue around with your stitching. In the same way, do your little applique stitch so that it will hold that tail in underneath. Try and make sure it stays nice and flat, pulling your stitches nice and tightly so you've got a little fence in there and it won't pop out underneath. So as I mentioned earlier, your tails will point in one of two directions, and when we get to the point, you'll either find that your tail is sticking out before the point or is facing away from the point. Now, because I'm stitching from right to left, I'm going to be coming up to this one and it's before the point on the leaf. So it is a little bit more difficult, but it's still the same process. When we get up to, you need to leave a little bit extra room before you get to the point, so that once again you can tuck that tail in underneath. So just like before, I would use my fingernail as much as possible to get that tucked in there. Now I've stitched probably up to about 1/4 inch away so that I can tuck it in and finish it off just with my needle, trying to get it as flat and as neatly in under there. So bringing my needle up again through my fabric, and once again just thinking of it as a gate that we're going to secure that little tail behind so that it's not going to pop out. So even if it means I just need to put a few extra little stitches around that point, I'll do that, because I don't want any of those little wispy bits popping out from my tail. So we're almost finished that leaf then now, and I'll just do a couple little stitches on that corner, because I started just around the other side there, checking the back, make sure I've gone all the way around, and I'll tie that one off. And the next step then is to join on our borders. And this is where you can get quite creative. I've given you plenty of fabric in your kit to do it in a few different ways. So I tossed around a few ideas, and in the end I took the lighter blue strips and I cut them in half, so down to 1 inch, and started along the bottom and then continued to stitch them on the sides. And then with the darker blue strip, I kept that whole and added it just to 2 of the sides. after that, I put my pellin on the back with the iron, and the pellin was a little bit shorter than the outside block, so I just trimmed down the block, and I've trimmed it from the front and used my ruler on the front to make sure that it lined up nice and square. The next step then, and as mentioned, just got the pellin on the back. I haven't put the backing fabric on yet, but we're going to embroider in the stem, and I'll go back to my, I think I called it an invisible pen yesterday. Obviously it's not invisible or we wouldn't be able to see it, but I think it's a disappearing pen, and it generally will disappear within a couple of hours. I do find that if it's hot, it will disappear much more quickly, which can be a nuisance, particularly if I'm traveling and want to, you know, keep the lines there for a few hours. So, yeah, need to work quickly. So I'm just going to draw in the stem then, starting from the middle of that center petal, and I'll finish it at the bottom there. What I'm going to be doing here, and I'll turn it this way so you can see, is called a stem stitch, and I like to work towards myself when I do a stem stitch, bringing the thread, and I've got 2 strands of embroidery floss there, bringing the thread up from the end, putting it back down a little way forward on the line that I've drawn, and then coming up halfway on the line. Now that's my first stitch. When I do the next one, I'll go down a little way further forward, and I'm going to bring my needle back up. Hope you can see that okay. I'll bring my needle back up at the point where that stitch went down. Hope you can see that okay. Now all the while holding this thread in my left thumb, because when I pull this through, then I can let it go and it's going to come back on the line like that. So one more, just keep your stitches equal distance apart as much as you possibly can, and come back up where that previous stitch went down, and then I've just simply tied that off on the back. Now I've given you a couple of different coloured embroidery threads, completely up to you how you use them. I've just done a little running stitch, or I will do a little running stitch around those petals, and I might use the blue for those, and the other colour I will just do a running stitch around there. So while I go and do that running stitch again, 2 strands of thread. I don't draw this in, I just simply follow the lines that I've put in with the applique, the lines that are there, and once again trying to keep your stitches evenly spaced. I find that if I put a few on my needle at once, you'll have a much straighter line than if you're just doing individual stitches. So that's what I'm aiming to do, getting a few stitches there on the needle before I pull that through. Keeping your work nice and flat as you go, and I'll go around all of those petals. When you're happy that you've got all the stitching that you want to do, and I've gone round it a couple of times, I love to just stitch. So if I'd had a bit more time, I would have done a couple more rows around here. But when you're happy, then it's time to put the backing fabric on, and to do that we just will line them up right sides together, and I'm going to stitch around, leaving an opening least visible side, probably 3 inches, so that I can turn it right side out. Once I've stitched it, the other thing that I'll do is, where I can, I will just trim back a little bit of the batting that's outside of my stitching line or my purlin, so that there's less bulk where those seams are turned over. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Once you've got everything sewn together and your corners are clipped, you've turned it right side out, the only thing left to do then is to stitch up that opening, and I would use my applique needle and the 80 weight thread to do that. Once again, it will just help to make the stitches as least visible as possible, and I know I need all the help I can get sometimes. I use a little ladder stitch, and if you can picture a ladder with the 2 sides and the rungs going acrossways, that's exactly what your stitching is going to be like here. So we'll start with our knot inside, and then we're going to just stitch from one side to the other like the rungs on the ladder, and it will travel down inside the fold just a little way, maybe 1/8 of an inch, a tiny little way, and then we're going to go back across to capture the other side, and we'll finish that off to close that opening. And that's the end of your project. I hope that you've enjoyed making that, and if you'd like some more of the little pre-cut flowers, you can find them on our website. Otherwise, yes, stay tuned for some more videos, and we'll get you moving on some more small slow stitching projects, which are just fun, relaxing, and they also make lovely gifts. Yeah, take care until next time. Cheers.